crisis can come at you from all sorts of directions. Some of it personal, some of it impersonal. The common feature to all crises is that they're not business as usual. It's something that is out of the ordinary. It could develop slowly, it could come very quickly. But you've got to act out of the ordinary. There's an urgent problem that you need to address immediately. In a sense, that definition is easy to come by. The really important thing is, what do you do when the crisis arrives? I'd just like to share one thing with you that those of you who've been to some of the courses that Harvard ran for us a few years ago might find familiar. Both from Dutch Leonard, who wrote that an effective response in a crisis can be defined as something, it's a good enough decision, made soon enough to matter. Again, crisis, you're under time pressure. Also, it is communicated well enough to be understood, and then carried through well enough to work. I find that helpful. I hope you may too. And from our speakers today, some of them will help talk to you about the preparation of the teams that were then ready to make these decisions. Others, I would ask you, will talk about the communication that's so important during the course of the crisis, both internally and externally. But in the course of our guide, we've picked a few examples of crisis, case studies that, again, I hope will help you to think through the challenges that you may face. For today, we've picked one that isn't in the guide, since it's even more up to date, the Typhoon Maripot in Taiwan. All of you will be familiar with that from the papers. But the consequence, in other words, of not being prepared for such a crisis up front. And also think about the poor communication during the crisis, both of what they were doing officially and even the unofficial actions. President Ma taking time to go off and have his hair done. One Vice Premier going off and celebrating Father's Day at a time when many people were suffering. Again, Ray will emphasise on the importance of empathy and clear communication, getting across to the public that we understand their problem and are working on it as part of the key thing in managing the crisis. Of course, crises don't always expose things that have gone wrong. Sometimes it's a chance to show how well you were prepared beforehand. Again, there are examples of this. The 9/11 terrorist attacks. Again, there was a very quick response. People acted quickly, they were encouraged to act quickly. Other nations surging, volunteers coming in quickly, the system being able to absorb those volunteers quickly. If you manage crisis well, then there'll be a good public response. And even, again, if you look at the case studies on 9/11, there were things that were actually done very badly beforehand, things on which the government could legitimately have been criticised, but because it acted well at the time, those criticisms were perhaps set aside. There is a question also on this, whether the aftermath of the event, people getting caught up in the passion of the moment, then led to people to go too far, not to stop when enough was enough. And a contrast with the terrible 9/11 attack is again another terrible terrorist incident in Madrid. Again, very quick emergency response, teams going into action within seconds. They were well prepared. Different groups came in to help. Very quick response to the incident itself. Very quick handling of the public pressures. Again, beyond it, also mourning of the event, giving an opportunity for the public to vent their grievances, but then drawing a line, getting things back to normal quickly. And that's a key thing in crisis handling. Yes, you've got to cope with the crisis directly, but the point of coping well is to get things back to normal so that people can go on with their lives again. So, what we've asked ourselves in our own guide and in inviting our speakers this afternoon is to share with you what makes a difference in a crisis between handling it well and handling it badly. The key thing is being prepared with a crisis management plan. And crisis management is the whole process, not just of when the thing happens, then you act. but thinking beforehand what might happen, preparing for it, identifying appropriate organisations, appropriate structures to deal with it, and then through the crisis itself, making sure that those resources are deployed well. We'll introduce you in the guide to this concept of a crisis management cycle. The preparation, planning, training, simulations, thinking about what a crisis may be, so that although we may be caught by surprise by what it is that creates the crisis, the knowledge of how to act and who should be acting in a crisis is already in the organisation. But then the management isn't simply a matter of following through on some pre-designed plan. Again, contingencies, things will be different to those you've trained for, making sure there's sufficient flexibility in the organisation to cope with the unexpected, that there's sufficient room for initiative within the organisation. But the circle has to be closed. It's not just a matter of preparing well and managing well, but then learning from the experience that you've been through. And from our studies internationally, quite often it's this evaluation stage that's the most difficult thing to go through. And there can be a lot of emotions generated in the course of the crisis. You think your team has done well, but perhaps another department has not been as helpful. The communication with departments after the event to get a proper assessment of what it was that happened, what are the real lessons to be learned from it, and making sure that those are learned can be quite difficult. So again, getting into your departmental crisis planning tools, the idea that during the crisis itself, you must also be preparing for the evaluation of it, so that the lessons can be learned, so that next time round we're all better prepared, is a crucial thing. But it's what happens on the day itself. If your phone is not switched on, if you don't know how to use the technology. Every day in Hong Kong, you are faced with the potential for problems, be it a burst water main, the terrible tragedy in ICC a few days ago, a sudden school closure, and we do follow up, and of course H1N1. All these crises, ones like them, may occur every day. But we have before us Dr. Thomas Chung, who every day has to go into the office and face the possibility of there being some global pandemic. I think all of us have looked with admiration and a great deal of respect at the calm and clarity with which he has met all those, and we're very grateful to have him here today. Also, we have John Lamont from the Airport Authority. Those who in years past in the security branch were involved with the air crash contingency plan, which fed into many departmental plans, was that the worst thing we could imagine happened to Hong Kong was an aeroplane crashing just short of Kai Tak Airport. The airport has moved a bit, but still those threats and the need for a well-planned, well-prepared response should anything go wrong remains crucial. Communications, Ray Radowski will be talking about this. You cannot spend enough time thinking and preparing people for communication internally and externally. It doesn't matter how well you manage internally, if you don't explain to the public what's going on, you can still get slated for not having had a proper response. And that external pressure can then lead to misjudgments about the nature of the event itself, distort the learning experiences. So again, communication handling is crucial. And then David Ryan from Kroll Associates, former police officer, will share his experience from the private sector side. In crisis management, there isn't a great divide between the private sector and the public sector. There are lessons for all of us from the private sector there as well, and he will share those with us. Without more ado, I hand over to Dr. Thomas Chung to start us off with his talk on global pandemic, a usual day at the office.